Over the years, Roblox has been a platform for some of the most exciting, educating, and difficult games ever created. From solving extremely confusing and mind-boggling puzzles to trying to obtain some of the hardest badges on Roblox, players have always strived to push the website to its absolute limits. But one community stands out: the Ito community. Eternal Towers of Hell, formerly known as Juke's Towers of Hell, is a wide library of long parkour towers ranging from easy up to some of the hardest obbies ever beaten. While the game might look quite simple and enjoyable for a new player, beneath the surface, hidden in one of the many zones, lies a section almost unfathomable to most Roblox players. A section so difficult that ever since its release in 2022, no one has been able to beat it. This is how Roblox's hardest game was finally beaten. Before we start this video, I'd really appreciate if you could subscribe. Only a small percentage of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed, and I'm trying to reach 20,000 subscribers in 2025. So if you could hit that red button, it would mean the world to me. Anyway, let's get back into the video. This is Pit of Misery. On average, the hardest section in the entire game, ranking in at low catastrophic on the difficulty chart, the highest canon difficulty. A subrealm so difficult where only the most determined players stand a chance. The very dark landscape feels hostile, unlike sections in the rest of the game. Scattered across its dark void are eerie, desolate islands, each one home to towers so cruel and punishing that few can even comprehend them. The difficulty is unrelenting. Every single jump is precise, designed to push players to their absolute limits. The smallest mistake can send you plummeting back to the start, ruining hours of grueling progress. Before this section was released, Jato had already been conquered. By the summer of 2021, players had just come off the back of verifying Tower of Cruel Punishment, the hardest tower in the entire game. It was a monumental achievement, the culmination of years and skill of dedication. Jato had been beaten, and the top players had nowhere else to go. There were no harder towers left within the game, so they began to look outward, seeking something harder, beyond what Jato had to offer. But the developers weren't done. They understood that if Jato was to remain relevant, it had to evolve. And so, they set out to create something that shouldn't exist. A section so unfathomably difficult that it would shatter all expectations of what was possible. For months, they worked tirelessly, creating the darkest section in the entire game. Something that would push even the best players to their absolute breaking point. On March 20th, 2022, Pit of Misery was released, and it was unlike anything the community had ever seen. The Jato difficulty chart was no longer enough. This section had broken through the ceiling, introducing difficulties that had once been considered quite frankly impossible. 4 towers were rated horrific difficulty, 3 reached the unreal difficulty, something that at the time had been laughed off as impossible. One of the players that got to witness the release of Pit of Misery was Jihadimad. Upon release, he wouldn't target the towers right away, only completing one on May 2nd, 2022, Tower of Modernistic Design Choices. While most of the towers in the section seemed ruthless and unforgiving, this one was, well, the complete opposite. The tower stands out from the others by being an easy difficulty. It parodies the rest of the ridiculously difficult towers by having opposite warnings on the tower's portal. Instead of definitely not for mobile or beyond human limits, it has definitely for mobile and extremely possible. While definitely not a difficult tower, it still was in the Pit of Misery. And just like that, Jihad had conquered 1 out of the 14 towers. And this was just the start. It wasn't really a significant victory, and he wouldn't return to Pit of Misery until 2023. In the meantime though, Jihad's skill continued to grow. He beat Tower of Cruel Punishment and several other high difficulty tiered obbies, such as Comatose. With each completion, his ability sharpened, and by the time he returned to Pit of Misery, his skill level had reached mid to high catastrophic. The Pit of Misery hadn't changed, but Jihad had. He was now ready to take on the towers that had once seemed impossible. Nearing the summer of 2023, Jihad finally made his way to the Pit of Misery. After beating Tower of Cruel Punishment, a peak catastrophic tower, Jihad seeked to push beyond the Ito difficulty chart and be one of the few victors of a horrific difficulty tower, Tower of Vacant Hindrances. This is Tower of Vacant Hindrances. In this tower, minimal structures are scattered throughout the tower, meaning there aren't a lot of places to save yourself in case you fall down, defining its extreme punishment, except for the partially netted final stretch. While the tower is horrific difficulty in-game, the true difficulty found on the top towers list is somewhere around catastrophic, due to the tower being old and overrated in difficulty because of that. In fact, it used to be the hardest tower ever beaten, and now it was Jihad's turn to beat it. By the time he got to the tower, most, if not all of the strategies for each jump of the tower had been found and perfected. All Jihad had to do was execute it, and knowing he had the skill for it, he did just that. With that, Jihad had taken down 2 of the 14 towers in Pit of Misery. With the momentum going, he quickly went on to beat all of the terrifying difficulty towers, which included Tower of Zerically Infuriating Calamity. The gimmick of this tower is that it utilizes many green hazardous kill bricks, hence its acronym, Toxic. It is also known for most of its gameplay being filled with wall hops and thin studs. This proved to be no trouble for Jihad though, beating it in only 3 days after his Tower Vacant Hindrances completion, on May 11th, 2023. And similarly to Tower of Zerically Infuriating Calamity, he went on to beat every single terrifying difficulty tower. To Jihad, they were all pretty simple and fun to do. After all, if he did want to verify Pit of Misery, he shouldn't be worrying about these towers, and he didn't. He easily breezed through them. But unbeknownst to him at the time, the titans he'd face later would push him to the brink, breaking him down mentally and making every second of the grind feel like a battle against himself. But the terrifying difficulty was merely a warm-up. It was catastrophic, where he would start to face his first roadblocks. While the first catastrophic he beat, Tower of Vindictive Maneuvers, was quite simple for a catastrophic, Jihad finding it quite fun and enjoying the wraparound gameplay of it, the same fully can be said for Tower of Shunning Excursion, a catastrophic tower known for its 3 difficult sides, meaning the tower is split into 3 sections, side A, B, and C, which have various softlocks spread throughout. This tower was a big roadblock in Jihad's grind. The last few floors of the tower were quite a problem to pass consistently. Adding on to them being quite challenging, the death pits right beneath you meant a single fail would end the whole run. The seaside, or the last part of the tower, was extremely frustrating for Jihad, which made it quite difficult to beat. But knowing he can push through, he kept going. And on September 2nd, 2023, he finally beat Tower of Shunning Excursion. But this was only the beginning. For months, Jihad had conquered every tower thrown at him, from terrifying to catastrophic. He had pushed through every roadblock. But now, he was stepping into something else entirely. Something beyond what Ito was meant to contain. The horrific difficulty. For years, the Ito difficulty chart had set the limits of what was possible. Catastrophic was supposed to be the peak, the absolute ceiling of human capability. But the pit of misery shattered that idea. Horrific was proof that obbies were becoming too good, and this was the developer's way of stopping them. The first difficulty to break away from the canon chart. A difficulty so extreme that many believed it was outright impossible for a human to beat at the time. And now, it was Jihad's next challenge. Having beaten Tower of Vacant Hindrances in May of 2023, he already had some experience with a horrific tower, if you can call it that. The first actual horrific he would attempt to grind was Tower of Watermelon. As the name implies, the frame and its colors resemble a watermelon. It contains many difficult and precise jumps, with a mixture of wraparound, truss, and the occasional janky gameplay. It is infamous for its difficult spinners on floors 5 and 6, which are over soft blocks, and floor 10, which is one of the hardest floors in the tower due to being under a strict button timer. Conquering this would mark Jihad's first actual pit of misery horrific tower, but luckily for him, he found the tower quite enjoyable. Floor 1 was quite a roadblock, Jihad not finding it fun at all. However, it being the first floor of the tower, it did get consistent. Aside from that, the tower was fun, and he didn't struggle on it. But what will come next would almost mentally break him. This is Tower of the Roof's Peak. This tower's frame is tilted sideways, with all of its gameplay being on the roof, hence its name. This tower's frame also makes it very unforgiving, with all falls resulting in loss of all progress. The tower features a lot of janky gameplay, meaning bricks are rotated and oriented in weird positions, forcing players to come up with new strategies and do jumps they've never done before. Compared to other horrific difficulty towers in Pit of Misery, Tower of the Roof's Peak is brutal, and Jihad's experience with it was absolutely horrible. TOTRP was his first large roadblock in the grind. While Tower of Shunning Excursion caused some issues, this was something else. For Jihad, specifically floors 4 and 7 caused the most trouble. By the time he got somewhat consistent at floor 7, he had racked up around 30 to 35 fails on it, with a very similar situation to floor 4, where he kept failing the same 3 to 4 jumps over and over and over again. This was the first point where he started to think he might not be able to do it. After all, a whole difficulty was still ahead of him, with towers even harder than this. At the time, Jihad wasn't the best player. Adding on to that, jank gameplay wasn't really his strong point. Failing floors due to getting bounced off was extremely common, but he kept pushing. And after 4 to 5 months of grinding, on August 21st, 2023, he finally did it. Jihad beat Tower of the Roof's Peak. The next tower, Tower of Eternal Void, was a whole different kind of beast. While TOTRP tested his patience with jank and unpredictability, TOEV was a challenge of endurance and precision, and Jihad was about to find out just how brutal it can be. Tower of Eternal Void is composed of the first 10 floors of the original version of Citadel of Void, an impossible citadel known as one of the most infamous towers ever created, but nerfed to be humanly possible. While the grind on this tower was no different from Tower of the Roof's Peak, luckily, the gameplay wasn't janky like in the previous tower. The jumps are fairly simple to understand, and Jihad actually enjoyed playing some of it, and luckily, it didn't cause as much problems as Tower of the Roof's Peak. But the tower was still absolutely horrible. Jihad considering it the worst tower in the entire Pit of Misery due to its horrible gameplay, as well as being a waste of time and not giving you skill for other towers. Towers like Tower of the Roof's Peak and Tower of Eternal Void were starting to prove to Jihad just how difficult and dreadful some of the hardest towers could get. Luckily though, on December 21st, 2023, he beat Tower of Eternal Void. The first 10 nerfed floors of Citadel Void seemed to be filled with horrible gameplay, and was a very frustrating tower for Jihad to grind. But the remaining 12 floors still remained, looming in the Pit of Misery, waiting for Jihad to take a shot at it. It seemed as though Jihad had conquered every horrific tower in the section. He was ready to step into the realm of the unreal difficulty. But his journey wasn't over yet. Lurking in the shadows, unnoticed by most, there is one final horrific tower standing in his way. A tower so insignificant in appearance that it didn't even announce its completion in the game's chat up until recently. This so-called tower didn't even include a frame, almost as if it weren't a tower at all. Yet, it was waiting there. A practice tower, of all things. Steeple of Cheeseburger. At first glance, Steeple of Cheeseburger seemed like nothing compared to the towers Jihad had already overcome. A practice tower, an afterthought in all fairness. But in the Pit of Misery, nothing could be taken lightly. Despite its significance, the steeple demanded just as much precision as the others. The jumps were precise and the movement required was strict, and even the smallest mistakes could send him back to the start. For Jihad, this was just another step forward in a seemingly endless grind. But even without the recognition, he had to finish what he started and keep pushing to be the first to fully beat the Pit of Misery. And so, through countless attempts, he kept going until, at last, he conquered the final horrific difficulty in the Pit of Misery. Steeple of Cheeseburger was beaten, and Jihad had conquered the horrific difficulty. And now, 3 beasts were left. Jihad had spent months tearing through the horrific difficulty, proving again and again that he was capable of the impossible. He had taken down a watermelon, pushed through jank and precise movements in Tower of the Roof's Peak, conquered the god-awful gameplay inside of Tower of Eternal Void, and defeated the horrific difficulty with the practice tower, Steeple of Cheeseburger. But even after all of that, he still wasn't at the peak, because beyond horrific laid something even worse. Ever since the official release of Ito under Kitty Cannon, now known as Oberntune, catastrophic difficulty was the undisputed peak of Roblox obbying. It was the final frontier, the absolute limit of human capability. But time changed everything. Players got better. Horrific difficulty, once thought to be a joke, started falling one tower at a time. Each new challenge, each supposed ceiling of difficulty was shattered. What was once impossible became just another step forward. And now, Jihad was about to enter the true pinnacle of obbying, the unreal difficulty. This was the peak humans were able to reach. It was a complete shift in what it meant to be an obby. Every jump was crafted with inhuman precision. Even C. Lazulski, the creator of Tower of Spiraling Fates, one of the unreal towers in Pit of Misery, stated that the tower was never meant to get beaten. When creating it, the thought process behind it was creating something that would show off what Roblox obby perfection could be. And for Jihad, this was the final wall standing between him and the greatest achievement in obby history. And the first unreal difficulty tower would push Jihad beyond his limits. Tower of Blind Fate. Created in 2019 by Nosav, was a relic of a past era, and with that came all the flaws of outdated obby design. Jumps weren't just difficult, they were brutal, inconsistent, and unforgiving. The tower's age showed in almost every jump. Nothing was refined, and nothing was fair. And for Jihad, this would be his greatest test yet. And it didn't take long for cracks to form. The grind was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Failures usually weren't his fault. The buggy, archaic gameplay meant that no matter how perfectly he played, there was a chance the game would simply decide he wasn't making it through. Run after run, he fell to jumps that felt more like dice rolls than a test of skill. He didn't need to be just good. He needed to be incredibly lucky as well. And it broke him. For the first time, doubt seeped into his mind. Maybe he just wasn't good enough. Maybe this was where his journey ended. Other hobbyists, Skitsuna, and Monsters of Block were moving on, beating towers and obbies even harder than Tower of Blind Fate, while he remained stuck in place. The gap between him and the best seemed wider than ever, and with every failed run, the thought became even harder to ignore. Was he really ever on their level? The hardest floors, 8 and 10, were where the difficulty peaked. Simply not focusing enough and the slightest miscalculation meant losing the run in an instant. No matter how much he practiced, progress felt non-existent. Even when he finally started improving, the tower had one last trick up its sleeve: RNG. Fate would intervene, tearing him down again and again. But Jihad refused to give up. And after months of grueling suffering, after fighting against the tower that seemed like it was going to break him, after questioning everything he thought he knew about himself, he did it. Jihad beat Tower of Blind Fate. This victory was unlike any other. A battle won not just against the tower, but against himself. He could have just given up, but he didn't. And yet, even then, as he stood at the top, one thought lingered in his mind. This wasn't the end. Jihad's victory over Tower of Blind Fate made him realize that he was among the best, and nothing could stop him. For months, that tower had torn him apart. It had shattered his confidence, forced him to question if he was even good enough. The brutal gameplay, the relentless inconsistency, the sheer hopelessness of it all. It was unlike anything he had ever faced. And yet, somehow, through sheer determination, he beat it. He had proven to himself that he could conquer the absolute worst, that no matter how impossible a challenge seemed, he was capable of beating it. And now, that belief was the only thing that kept him going. 12 towers had fallen before him, but 2 still remained. The true final bosses of the Pit of Misery. These weren't just the hardest towers in the game, they were some of the hardest ever created, the very peak of human capability. And first on that list was Citadel of Infinite Void, the last remaining floors of Citadel of Void. It was a tower stretched across 12 punishing floors. If Tower of Blind Fate was about skill and luck, Citadel of Infinite Void was about consistency. It was long. Over an hour of precise gameplay was required to beat it, and every single mistake meant losing the run. And that's where Tower of Blind Fate had changed him. Before, a tower like this would have absolutely crushed him. The fails, losing so much time, the hopelessness. It would have been too much. But now, he knew what it was like to grind something that felt impossible. He knew what it was like to be torn apart by a tower and still keep going. So no matter how many times Citadel of Infinite Void tried to make him give up, no matter how many hours he lost, he refused to give up. Cause Tower of Blind Fate had already taught him the truth. The Pit of Misery wasn't impossible. And on December 13th, 2024, he proved it. This was it. 3 years of grinding. 3 years of pushing himself past every limit. From struggling on Tower of Shunning Excursion, just trying to improve to reach the horrific difficulty, up to Citadel of Infinite Void, refusing to back down. And now, only one final tower remained. Tower of Spiraling Fate. The last and most infamous tower of the Pit of Misery. A tower so impossibly difficult that its own creator, C. Lazulski, believed it would never get beaten. Its frame twisted like a spiral, therefore its name. For the longest time, even Jihad had no idea if it was possible. Back in October of 2024, the tower still stood unbeaten. No one could pass the 9th floor, a brutal barrier that had stopped every attempt dead in its tracks. A reminder that even among the best, there were limits. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of them. So Jihad turned away. He chose Citadel of Infinite Void instead. But then, on October 27th, everything changed. Tower of Spiraling Fate was no longer impossible. And now, for the first time, Jihad allowed himself to believe he could be the first to beat the Pit of Misery. But even with that belief, there was one problem. Other players like Monster is a Block and Green Bean 1421 had tackled this tower with 144 FPS, a small but crucial advantage. Jihad, he was playing on 90 FPS. From the very start, he was fighting an uphill battle, but he didn't care. He had come too far to let anything stop him now. Over the next few weeks, he streamed his attempts, getting better and better, pushing himself further and further. It wasn't fun, it was exhausting, but for once, it wasn't demoralizing, because this time, the pressure was gone. He had already proven himself. He had conquered the impossible. And this was just the final chapter. Finally, on January 25th, 2025, it all came to an end. Upon verifying Pit of Misery, Jihad was simply relieved. Not just because of the fact he had gotten the hardest accomplishment in Roblox obbying history, but because he made history. All the 3 years he spent grinding Pit of Misery didn't go to waste, and he could relax and be in a state of repose after all he went through. From Jihad's own words, the victory was a pure tribulation. From his first steps in Tower of Modernistic design choices in 2022 to standing atop the hardest tower ever beaten. This was the pinnacle of Roblox obbying. the greatest achievement in its history. And that is how Roblox's hardest game was finally beaten.